Without question, fully immersive digital experiences, I think. Um, I was going to go off script for a second, sorry. I just did a session called Shopping on the Holodeck. And the whole idea was that when I grew up, there was this thing that Star Trek gave the world of imagination, which was a totally virtual environment that you go in and you run in two modes, subjective mode and objective mode. Objective, sit outside the experience, you simply watch as an observer, and subjective, you're actually in there and you create it. You're actually manufacturing part of that digital content. You're writing the narrative of the experience. And I was saying that it's fascinating how those two things parallel very much what's happening in the retail world, because for years and years and years, we've been in the objective mode. You go to the store presents you with this experience, and you're a casual observer, third party, one size fits all, and that's it. But we're not seeing that with kids. My 15-year-old, who I love talking about, is brilliant in this way because he's a digital manipulator and he's a digital storyteller, and that's what he does with his life. And he creates digital content. He pushes it into his social media network through Instagram and other social media feeds. And in doing that, he's a maker of experiences, but also his expectations about what's going to happen are also changing, in that he'll come to understand or come to believe that he should be integral to the part of the making of the story and be connected to what he's making in terms of his brand experiences. When you start thinking about how you can use digital media, virtual reality, augmented reality, those kinds of things, he will come to believe that his digital live stream will influence the environment he inhabits. So textiles will be woven with digital content that will allow you to upload or share content to a real room where the screen on the wall may not be there anymore. The wallpaper might be digital wallpaper that can change in colors, and that there's going to be some connectivity and sharing of that digital life story that will influence how the architecture happens, like the holodeck used to happen. That's amazing. And we're seeing it now with all the virtual reality headsets that you have, which are very cool. But still, we're in that sort of third-person objective. I'm participating in a pre-created experience, where I think that's going to change. And I think the more we use digital media, handheld devices or other things, imagine being in virtual space and creating objects in real time as virtual constructions, where you talk to the environment and you say, the chair sits beside the cupboard on the left. And the software is able to manufacture that in three-dimensional space, and then you can manipulate those objects and create experience. That's really very cool. A little bit scary, but really, really exciting, I think. I mean, that voice activation thing, right? This, is becoming the way we interact. I mean, it was a mystery to my father that I could talk to my phone and it would print, or it would write out what I was saying. But I do that more and more and more. I think that is the way that we're interacting more, and there's a facility with that because it's like this kind of engagement, right? We've relied on language as the mediator of experience between people often, right? And it's the narrative's sort of stream of information that allows us to tell stories and bind culture together. That's happening a lot in ones and zeros now, which is really intriguing. But more than that, I think what's equally exciting is that the idea that we now, in personal, embodied space, share affect, right? We share emotional connection to each other. I can read your facial expressions and your body language, and I have a set of things in my brain called mirror neurons, which allow me to feel the same. And so we share that. And what we know about our ability to share emotion is really intriguing, because if you see, read, or hear stories, areas of your brain light up as if you're actually in those stories. It's not a mystery to people who read stories and can somehow imagine themselves in the space of the story, that metaphysical netherworld that is only constructed in our imagination. But when we're there, we also are feeling the emotions of that narrative, right? We see movies and we cry. We read stories and we can laugh anyway. And so that ability of stories to activate emotion is critical. And we can do it over the internet. So when you think of being connected to a social network of 100 or 200,000 people, or a global net of people, the ability for us to share emotional experience to a broad network of, I call it the cognitive coalition of brand loyalists, is intriguing because that's the medium that will begin to share brand stories with each other. And it becomes intriguing to consider that the way I feel about something can be shared across the digisphere, and you take it on as well, and you in turn share it. The only challenge in our world now is that you never can fully extricate yourself from it. Right? Once you're out there and you're connected to the digital world, pieces of you are distributed and shared across the planet. And you can think you're going to shut down your SNS, social network site, and you're disconnect from your online banking and stop using Facebook or Twitter or any of your email things. But in a way, it's already too late, because all of the digital content that you have created up until that point still exists out there somewhere. And so we have, in a way, created these digital avatars that exist in a parallel space to our real life, that becomes a character from which we can get a lot of information and provide customized experiences to. So it's a bit scary. No, it's not scary. You know what's amazing about it is when we understand that our digital imprint lives in parallel to our real story. You can go two routes. Dystopian view, oh my gosh, this is going to be the end of all things, and we're going to live in the George Orwell 1984 life, or, any of those dystopian views of how science fiction has crafted the story, the narrative around, media integration. Or you can really begin to understand how an emerging customer uses technology to engage. And it won't be that they'll show up in your store and not really understand what you're doing. They won't simply have the same way of engaging in language and sharing experiences as you. And if you understand what drives them, that they're makers, that they want to be involved, those are in the making of experience. That's not unusual. We've always talked about empowerment with guests, and believing that if you can empower guests in the process, they likely are more intimately tied to the brand. They feel more connected to the brand because they simply haven't been told this is the color for this season, and if you don't like it, too bad, come back next season. But that's all changing, right? I mean, now we're having people who are able to craft experience, and that's important because they write themselves into the brand narrative. And when they do that, it becomes inherently more interesting to them because they're part of the story as participants rather than simply observers. It is a coalition, right? It's a grouping of people who are connected, where the internet allows us to share an experience of mind, and the net that surrounds the world is like it's this thing that I believe it's this thing that hovers above the embodied world, is this sort of overlay on our embodied experience, which is this digital experience that we all share to some degree, right? That we can share feelings over the internet. And the emotional content of our life experiences is really intriguing, because in the end, that's what we've always wanted to do anyway, I think, right? That we've wanted to, as humans, the core of our collective, the glue that's bound us together over years, I think, is the sharing of emotional stories and meaning. And I think we become more broadly connected to a larger group, and the influences of the group help establish a sense of context for us and what we mean in the world, which is foundational to who we are. It sounds kind of trite, but that's it, I think, right? And that's why the dopamine system and validation of getting your feedback from your friends when you send things out. That's why it is addictive, because we all have that inherent need to want to know that we matter. I think every time you come to DSE, you always find that one thing that is intriguing. So years ago, it was facial recognition systems, and that you could have an interface that would tell who you were as a guest and put you within a certain demographic, male of 45 years old or something. It always, by the way, pegged me as being 5 years older than I was, which I found quite disappointing, actually. but this year, I think what we're seeing a lot of is that immersive technology with the HTC Vive headsets and that sort of ability to be in augmented reality or virtual reality space. And it's huge for us in the hospitality world. It's huge because that's a great way for us to engage our owners, their architects, and have them really fully understand what we mean when we're trying to talk about a brand experience across multiple properties. And so you can go into those virtual worlds and you can share an experience in Paris, and then a moment later be in Barcelona, and then a moment later be in London, and you can be in the middle of these environments, which are extraordinary ways to convey the message. So those are the things that we're seeing a lot now, and that's terrific on a customer side. On a design and creation side, those things are becoming critical for us, not just as a post-validation of design, meaning the pretty pictures of virtual environments come at the end of all the other hard work. But we're seeing now that the virtual tools that are being developed are moving, at least we're trying, to push them more forward in the process, so that we're earlier and earlier in the design process getting into virtual environments so that we have a better test case, a better test run of things early, so that you don't go down a very long process that's costly, build it, and then go, oh gosh, it didn't really deliver on the feeling that we thought it would, which is wonderful. So it's completely augmenting the way that we're doing that. And we're discovering that we're using multiple tools. So we're not just using the headsets, the virtual reality headsets. At Marriott, we're using things like Igloo, which is a 360-degree viewing experience, immersive environment where you can get a number of people and stand inside this thing and they can see the world that you're creating around them, which is wonderful. It's a really fabulous tool because it is a little bit of a unique ability for architects to see things in two-dimensional space and in their mind's eye be able to imagine it represented in three-dimensional space. And we know a lot of people can't do that. So there is like a pinch point in the idea of discussing a project with guests or with clients, in that there is a leap of faith that they take. And what we also know is that once they get into those virtual spaces, it's a no-brainer. They understand it completely, and they jump very quickly to moving the process forward. So that's where virtual really is a great tool. I think some of the new things are how the interesting thing about as an architect is that our process has always started off in 2 dimensions. Right? You start by sketching something on the napkin, scribbling it on a piece of tracing paper. You early on, if you're smart, is you start to build models right away, right? You get a sense of massing and form. Where the digital world is helping us is the ability to turn those ideas into 3-dimensional manifestations really quickly and be really good at representing the built environment. So we're using something called photogrammetry, which is using photographs to create 3-dimensional scans and then mapping those scans with the actual photograph. Because what we know a lot about in the digital renderings of things is that sometimes they look hyper-real. They sort of go to this other side where you can tell right away that they don't quite look right. And it's a real challenge in rendering out those kinds of 3-dimensional worlds to get the lighting right, because what we're able to create in digital space and what we create in our eyes and in our visual cortex are different things. But now that if we're able to take photographs of things that represent how the intricate light pattern is across a surface that is more difficult sometimes to create in digital space, and then wrap those digital objects with photographs, is an exceptionally compelling tool. And we're able to take software now where we can create models in different programs and drag those models into other software that takes those 3D models and turns them into virtual reality opportunities for us, like immediately. So that's super simple, because you can model very rudimentary things, drag them across, and all of a sudden put your headset on, all of a sudden you're standing in that space and manipulate. And when we get to the idea of being able to actually push a wall or pull a ceiling down in virtual space and manipulate the 3-dimensional objects, that'll be even better. So photogrammetry is the taking of pictures. It's a technology that uses a photograph or series of photographs to compose a 3-dimensional model of a thing, which is really, it's great. It sort of takes you out of the world of having to model everything and render it with a preset, set of bitmaps and sort of texture maps onto objects. It's extraordinary in terms of what it's giving us in terms of understanding space. It's really fun. There are some guys across, and I forget Actually, it's right there. It's the sparkles on the outside. Some guys from Montreal, ironically, I'm a Montrealer, who are showing it and showing HTC Vive headsets. And it's not the only one. I mean, there are many, providers of those things. I brought mine home on the weekend, and we didn't go outside for the weekend. It was just that captivating. It is. My 18-year-old son said, "Dad, this is the wave of the future." And I was thinking, yeah. He goes, "Dad, I could see how this could be totally addictive." And I say, yeah, it could be. The one adjective I'd use to describe this industry is enthusiasm. People are very excited. I think finally the technologies that we have caught up with our imagination and aspirations, and I think now we're actually able to use those things to make real the things that we were only imagining we could do, a few years ago. So there's a lot of enthusiasm, and people are moving quickly. I think that's the other thing. People are moving faster and faster, and the development of product and software and other technologies is happening quicker and quicker.